Hi everyone, my name is Alex Smetcher. I'm the Associate Director of Development for the Public Knowledge Project. We maintain open journal systems, open monograph press, and open preprint systems. I'll be presenting today on upgrading to OJS 3.5.0. So we're talking about journals here, but these instructions also apply to OMP and OPS as well. I'm going to be demonstrating an upgrade using OJS 3.3 to 3.5. I've got a test journal here installed with just a few bits of sample content, nothing too large, but there's a few PDFs and some basic content. I'm on an Ubuntu system here, so if I go into my terminal, I've got my web root in this directory, and I've got my files stored in a few locations I'll take you through. Your system will be a little bit different probably, but my goal here is to explain the principles behind this and do a quick demonstration that can be adapted to whatever environment you're in. So I'm going to start with a note about LTS releases and the currently supported versions of OJS. LTS stands for long-term support, and that means we commit to a 3 to 5 year support window at fairly high stability. There are currently 3 branches of OJS that are actively supported as of August 2025. That's 3.3.0, which is an LTS release, 3.4.0, which is not an LTS release, and 3.5.0 has just come out. That will be an LTS release when we're ready to put that stamp on there, but currently it is not yet LTS. So watch for that stamp to appear on the download page. You might upgrade directly from major release to major release, so go from 3.3 to 3.4 to 3.5. That's totally okay if you want the latest features, or you might go right from 3.3 to 3.5 if you want to upgrade a bit less frequently and don't need the cutting edge features. Both of these pathways are totally okay, and they both follow the same process. We're going to go from this 3.3 to 3.5 upgrade path, so skipping over 3.4, but as I say, the instructions are the same for both. So I'm going to start by talking about what's in an OJS install. What pieces of it do you have to worry about when you're working with an installation, when you're doing a backup or a restore or an install or an upgrade? The first piece is the installation directory. This is where the source code lives. It's inside your web root. So it's in this case, it's in var www.html, that's the web root. And I've got it in a directory here called my journal. This is web accessible, meaning that the remote user can request anything in this directory here and either invoke it as PHP code or fetch it as a flat file, like an image file or something like that. The 2 pieces I'm going to highlight in here are the configuration file and the public files directory. The configuration file is, of course, going to tell OJS how to find the bits and pieces it needs to know how to reach in order to run. And then the public directory is where we store certain image files, like profile images and logos for the journal, that sort of thing. And those are, again, inside the web accessible area here. The second major piece is the database. This is your MySQL or Postgres database. And then the last one is the files directory. This is where we store user uploads, like submission documents. The files directory is outside of the web root. You should not put this inside the web root, or else you might get hacked. If you want to find out where these 2 live, then you can look in the configuration file. There's the database section, which tells you what kind of database you've got and how to access it. And then you've got this filesdir directive that tells you where to find the files directory. So if I look in my installation, I can go into var www.html my journal and find the OJS source code, including the configuration file. And in the configuration file, I can find the database section, and there you've got a MySQL database, you've got your username for the database, you've got your password, and then you've got the name of the database. Likewise, if I search for filesdir, you'll see that my filesdir in this case is in user share my journal. There's many ways of setting this up. This is just one that's okay. As long as you're not putting the files directory inside the web root, you should be okay. So I'm going to go through the steps to running an upgrade now. There's 5 steps I'm doing in this case. 1 is to make a backup, 2 is to get the new code, 3 is to update the configuration file and copy the contents of the public files directory in, 4 is to run the upgrade, and 5 is to install any plugins you need to install. There are many ways of doing this, and you'll notice that the current upgrade guide has a different set of steps. They're all to achieve the same thing, but I want to, in this case, keep it quick and approachable and give you the concepts behind it. The instructions on the upgrade guide are also correct. They're just a bit more in depth. So step 1, make a backup. Do not skip this step. There are users who come to our support forum semi-regularly who say, my database is broken, I'm not sure how this happened. It turns out that they've not taken a backup, they've tried to run an upgrade to a newer version, something has failed in the upgrade process, and that's left their database and files directory somewhere between the 2 versions, and that's quite hard to recover from. So make sure you take a backup, it's a good idea. So to make a backup, there's the same three components, the installation directory, the database, and the files directory, and we have to back those all up separately. You can use whatever tools you like. I'll be using tar for both the installation and the files directory. And for the database, I'll be using MySQL dump, but you could also use pgdump for Postgres or phpMyAdmin or whatever you like. So once again, if you want to know where to find these other two, you can use the configuration file to look up where those live and what the credentials are and so on. So first, I'm going to take an archive of the installation directory and the files directory. There's command lines I'm using here. Yours will vary. You can make a copy, you can use zip, you can use whatever you like. So I'm in the installation directory now, and you can see I've got my configuration file and all the various contents of OJS. So to back up the installation directory, I'll just take an archive of that using the tar tool. So tar, actually I'm going to make a directory called backups with today's date, just my preference, and then use the tar tool to make an archive. Give it the current directory to back that up. That'll take a minute or so to run. When that's finished, I'll do the same thing with the files directory, which is in this case is in user share my journal. Again, you can get that from the configuration file if you're not sure where to find it. And I'll reuse the same command, just modifying the name of the destination file to files.tar.gz. So I've got an archive of that. There's very few files in my test install, so that was very quick, but chances are yours will be a lot larger. Okay, that's the first two of the three pieces of the installation. The last, of course, is the database. This is a bit more involved, but shouldn't be a surprise to you if you're a system administrator. I'm going to use MySQL dump. I'll specify the host. It's localhost, so probably can get away without that. I'll specify my username, the password, and then the name of the journal. I'll pipe that into gzip to compress it, and I'll save that in the same directory. And that'll go ahead and run. This warning you can ignore. I think MySQL is trying to do something that I haven't got privileges for, but it does get all the important stuff. So let's just take a look inside that backup directory and see what's there. We have these three files. Your database and your files directory will be a lot larger because you've got more content than I do, almost certainly. And then the installation is going to be around the same size. So we have backed all those contents up successfully, so we can now make a mistake and successfully restore and be able to proceed without having to worry too much. So step 2 is to get the new code. If you go to the download page on the PKP website for OJS, you'll get the list of current releases, and we're going to work with 3.5. Currently it's 3.5.0-1. If this is coming along in a few months, it'll be something larger, but anyway, I'll copy the link for that. If I go to this command line, this is a little bit fancy, but all we're doing is we're downloading the file and then we're extracting it into the location I want. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to make a place to put the new contents of this archive. So what I will do in this case is I'll go out of my journal into the web root. I'm going to move my journal to my journal-old. So I save my old contents. Then I'm going to make a new directory called my journal and give myself ownership of it. So now I've got my journal-old with the old contents in it, so those are handy. I've got a new directory called my journal. I own it so I can modify it, and it's empty. So now I'm going to use this command line here to download the contents of the OJS package and then extract it. So send the output to standard output. We're going to get this URL. Then we're going to pipe it into tar, extract, decompress, and then there's this extra strip components, which is just a fancy way of getting rid of the leading OJS directory that's in that archive. But you can extract it the way you want, move the files in if you like, any way you prefer. So now if I look, I can see all that stuff that's part of the new OJS installation has been extracted successfully. We're on to step 3 now, which is to update the configuration. So the old install in my journal-old has the old configuration file. There it is. And the new one has just a default configuration file that's not installed. For example, it doesn't know about your database, it doesn't know about your files directory. So the way I like to do this is I like to copy the old configuration file in, into the new location. And the one thing you have to be aware of here is that there are differences in the configuration file between the old version and the new version. We were using 3.3 before, and now we're going to 3.5. So there were changes introduced with 3.4, and then more with 3.5 as well. So if you look in the release notes for the software, there's release notes for 3.4 and release notes for 3.5. And these walk through all the configuration changes. I do recommend going through these. They'll talk about things like the date formats have changed. The old formats will continue to work, but they're now deprecated. So you could get away with not changing these, but the chances are that down the line in a year or two when you do a subsequent upgrade, when those are no longer deprecated but now removed, you'll find that you have to update them. So it's good to stay in touch with what the changes are and update them as you go. I'm not going to walk through these in great detail because it would take some time. All I'm going to do is highlight two things. One is that the format of the locale code has changed. The default locale is usually English. You might choose a different language when you start, and we used to use these 5-letter codes, EN_US, but we've now moved that for better standardization to using primarily 2-letter codes. You can look in the locale directory for a list of the available locale codes and see what you're using, but you'll probably have to update this setting called locale to the new format. So that's one change we're going to have to do. The second one is configuration parameters for emails. There's a new default setting here. So you can look through this and find the documentation and review it. This is the same for version 3.5. There is a bit of overlap here. We mentioned some things in both places. The other thing you can do if you're not sure how to configure something is look in the configuration template file. We could look for that locale setting we were talking about, which is EN in this case. You'll see in the old configuration file it'll be EN_US. And then in the email section is that other setting that it was talking about, which is this default setting, and it's set to send mail. So if you're not sure, you can just pick up the defaults from the default configuration file for the most part. So I'm going to update the configuration file. This is my one that I've copied across from the old installation. I'm going to change EN_US to EN, and then that email template one there is this setting here, so I'm just going to copy that across as well. And like I say, you should review the rest of the notes there and make those adjustments, but I'm going to save us a bit of time by not going through that. Okay, so that's updating the configuration file, and there's notes here on what you should know about that. The last piece here is to copy the contents of the public files directory across. The public files directory is in a directory called public. And in this case, it doesn't actually contain anything, but if you do have journal logos and that sort of thing, this is where they live. So you'll want to copy those across so that when you run the new version of OJS, it still has those. So I'm going to copy the contents of my journal-old/public/star to public. So now we've brought that across from the old installation to the new installation. That's it for step 3. Step 4 is to run the upgrade, and that's just to run this PHP script to upgrade the database and potentially rearrange the files in the files directory. So if we run that with the upgrade verb, it will go through and adapt the database and the files directory to the expectations of a new version of the software. While this is running, it's going to take a minute. I'm just going to take a minute to talk about what this is doing. Going back to the dawn of OJS, we had a very simplistic usage of the database, and it was possible for a long-lived installation of OJS to accumulate sort of garbage data as time went on, things that weren't fully deleted, that sort of thing. Starting with 3.4, and especially in 3.5, we're using foreign keys in the database, and those allow us to introduce referential integrity so that it's much more difficult for garbage data to get introduced. But as we add those rules to better control the quality of the data in the system, we also have to clean up old data that doesn't conform to those expectations. So what we're doing here is, among other things, we are looking for inconsistent data in the database and dealing with it. For the most part, it's possible to remove things when we're confident that we don't need them, but there's some kinds of data that we don't want to do that with. If you have submissions, for example, that belong to non-existent sections, we wouldn't want to remove those submissions because that might be good data. So wherever it's possible, the upgrade cleans up the data, but there are some cases where we stop the upgrade and ask the user to reconcile some data first. So if you've used OJS 3.1, 3.1.1, some of those older releases, then it might be possible for you to encounter a prompt here suggesting that you clean up some data before you run the upgrade. If you run into that and you're not sure what to do with it, then I recommend you post on the support forum or look there for further guidance, and you should be okay to move ahead with just a couple of small corrections. Once you get to version 3.4, and especially to 3.5, with those referential integrity checks in place, life will become a lot easier for future upgrades. But getting there from 3.3, and especially from older versions, might take a little bit of work. So stick with it, it'll be worth it, and I promise that upgrades in the future are going to be a lot quicker and a lot easier. That's my spiel while this runs. It's probably almost finished. Okay, there we go. There's a couple of downloads that this does that take a minute or two, depending on network conditions. Okay, this is the thing you're looking for. Successfully upgraded to version 3.5.0.1. If you don't get this at the very end, then don't consider your installation successfully upgraded. You can also, of course, check the version by running this check verb, and it should tell you what your code version is, database, and what the latest version is. So, this is the release notes we went through to look at the configuration changes. You can review these if you like. There's a lot of stuff in there, but the important part here is that the configuration changes get applied like we did at the start here, and also that we get this message at the end saying it was successfully upgraded. So if all went well, I should be able to reload the page here. And guess what? This is now OJS 3.5.0. So if I log into the system, I'll see the new submission lists and everything should be functioning just fine. Okay, perfect. So that's the best case scenario. That's when things work really well. Oh, sorry, I've got one more step to go through, which is to install plugins. The plugins live in the system. I'll look in the old installation here in the the plugins directory. So there's plugins, generic, and there's all this stuff in here. A lot of these plugins come with OJS, but you might have found additional plugins that you've had to install either manually or through the plugin gallery. And because we moved the code to this old location, the old plugins will not be part of the new code base. And that's actually good. You don't want the old version of the plugins to be present in the new code base because those are not compatible. But what that means is when you finish with the installation, you have to log in as administrator. I'll just go in now as my admin account. So only administrators have the ability to to install plugins. We'll go into settings, into website, into plugins. And then there's a list of what's already installed in the system. You can go into plugin gallery and find whichever plugins you were using before and go in and install those. And that will complete things for you. There is plugin compatibility page. I'm just going to find this. That can be useful because when we release a new version of OJS, all plugins that you're using might not necessarily be available for the new release. So this page here is useful to tell you if you're not sure. You can just look for the plugins that you find most useful and see there's the old version and here's for 3.5. Just make sure there is a release for 3.5 as well. Okay, that is the full set of steps. Now you would want to test your installation. You'd want to take a new backup, make sure everything looks good. There is no way to roll back the installation to a previous version of OJS, so you'll want to make sure that everything looks pretty good before you cast your users free to work with it. Now let's take a look at what happens if something fails during the upgrade. I've got two examples here. One is if we are missing journal contact information. This was way back when not required. In 3.3 it is required, but if you have an older version it might not be present. But the upgrade process checks to make sure it is present for its own purposes, so that something else doesn't fail, and makes you add it if it's missing. The second example is if you have a mixture of MyISAM and InnoDB database engines in your MySQL. That's again a thing you might encounter if you've got a very old installation. So these are just two really specific examples of things that might go wrong to show you what that looks like and how you might get around it and proceed with the upgrade. If you run into something that's not on this list, then that's not a surprise. There will be lots of information on the support forum about what an error looks like, what it means, and how to resolve it. So feel free to join us there for more information about that. But just to give you an idea of what could happen. I'm going to simulate this first step here where there's missing journal contact information. I've loaded a backup database that shows this problem. And I've restored my installation to version 3.5 to show that. So if I go into the dashboard, go into the journal area, and into contact, these are required fields that are missing, and the upgrade is going to complain when I try and run on that. So let's go ahead and try it. I'm going to, as usual, move my journal to an old directory. I'm going to recreate that directory, change the order to myself. I'm going to get the 3.5 archive, which is somewhere up here. I'll just have to recreate that. And then I'll go through just quickly what we've done before, which is where we update the configuration file and we copy the public files directory in place. And that'll have us ready for the upgrade. It's a little bit slower this time for whatever reason. Okay, we got there. So we're going to copy the little configuration file here. I'm going to update the locale setting. I'm going to find that email setting, copy it across. And we'll copy the public files directory. Okay, so now we're ready to run the upgrade. But the upgrade in this case is going to fail because of that missing data. So it says here, contact name or email is missing for the contexts with paths public knowledge. If you had a multi-journal installation with a lot of journals, some might show up here, some might not. This tells you which ones you have to worry about fixing. So there's a few ways that we can do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the old directory because that's got my 3.3.0 source code. Well, first I have to restore the database from backup. Now, you might see in some cases that there's a pre-flight check failing. This is your key that you actually might be able to save a step. If it says a pre-flight check failed, the software is successfully upgraded to this point, but could not be upgraded further. Check the error and try again. In this case, you can actually rerun the upgrade with a correction in place and not have to step back to the backup. But I'm going to do the whole meal deal here and step back to the backup. That way we can be sure that everything's being rerun again. So I'm going to go into the database. I'm going to drop and recreate the journal. I'm going to load that from backup. This is again my demonstration of the contact info missing that I've prepared for this purpose. And then I'm going to restore my files directory as well. So now if I go back into my web root, into my journal, run the check command, I can see that my database is old, my code is new, but I still have to correct that missing data. So what I can do to actually save a little step here is go into that myjournal-old directory. myjournal-old. I can log in. This is still configured to use that old database and the files directory, which we've now restored back to 3.3.0. So what I'm going to do is make use of that being in place still and go into settings, journal, contact, fill in those missing fields. Save the database. And then I'm going to stop working with the -old and go back into my new directory where I've got the new source code extracted. Run the upgrade. And this time it's going to work. So that was just a small trick because we had the old directory lying around and because we already restored the other two components of the installation, that is our files directory and our database from backup. So those were all still 3.3.0 versions along with this 3.3.0 code. So we were able to use all of that to make the correction and then rerun the upgrade with the new source code. As soon as that's done, in fact right now, this is not going to work anymore because it's right now terraforming that database from the 3.3 version to 3.5. So that's one way of getting around failure. The other one I wanted to mention is this mixing MyISAM and InnoDB database engines. I'm not going to demonstrate that in great depth, but I'm just going to look at my database dump. If I look in, let's go to demo stuff. There's one here where I've got a mixture of these two things. If you look in the database dump, you'll see that it specifies what the database engine is, InnoDB or MyISAM. And if I search for MyISAM in this case, there is some old MyISAM tables. Now, MySQL doesn't use this anymore very much. These days, pretty much everyone wants to use InnoDB. But if you have an old installation that came from an older version of MySQL, you might still have some old MyISAM tables in place. So the quickest way to get these converted is to take a database dump like I've got here, search for MyISAM in it, and change the engine from MyISAM to InnoDB, wherever that should appear. So we had one there. Then if you reload this database dump back into your database and then try to run the upgrade on that, then that will then pass. So there's a few tricks you might have to know. These are all more or less sysadmin tricks, more so actually than OJS tricks, especially in the case of character sets and database engines and so on. But again, if you have an old installation, that might be anything that you run into. A couple of common pitfalls to mention here. I've already mentioned the first two, having no backup or making the files directory accidentally public by placing it inside the web root. The other two I'll mention here is forgetting to restore after upgrade. If an upgrade fails, you notice I went through and reloaded from database backup. You have to do that when you do so, when you do recover from a failed upgrade. You should also do the same with the files directory. Some upgrades do change the file directory around. The fourth step here is forgetting to recreate the database when restoring. If you're working with a database and you're reloading this database dump from a file, it'll take care of dropping and recreating any tables that are in the dump. But if there are any tables that are not mentioned in this dump, those will get persistent. Those will stick around your database. So you have to make sure that you drop the database and then recreate it before you load the database dump again. Okay, that's the common pitfalls. There's a lot more information on the support forum. If you run into problems or you have uncertainties about the process, please search that forum for other folks who've got the same discussion and join us there. If you have problems you haven't found solved, post there and we'll do our best to help you through it. I'm going to try to make sure that we review the documentation to keep it as specific as possible, because I know if folks are just now coming around to OJS 3.5 and wanting to upgrade to that, and they're using 3.3, that's 2 steps to make. So we'll try to make sure that the documentation is very clear as well. Once again, the upgrade process is involved with 3.3 to 3.4 in particular, but it's in the interest of cleaning up old data and making life a lot simpler in the future. So stick with it. We'll help you through it when you run into trouble on the support forum. I wish you good luck, and I hope that 3.4 and 3.5 are much more modern experiences for you to work with, to code if you're interested in doing coding, to maintain if you're just a sysadmin, to work with as an editor or whatever else that is that you're doing. Thanks for spending the time with me, and good luck.